Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, James. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this Winter Forum of the Russo-British Chamber of Commerce this afternoon. 2020 has been an extremely tough year. I think probably most of us are pleased to see it coming to an end. And we look forward to 2021 with optimism and hope. Anyway, this afternoon's forum is sponsored by Hudson Sandler. Thank you very much to them and to Andrew Hayes, their managing partner. And thank you all to our members and friends for all your support over the year. We have an exciting program this afternoon looking at ESG with respect to the retail sector, as well as hearing about the ESG framework that is being developed from the banking sector. I hope you'll find it helpful, informative, interesting. The event would normally finish off with drinks and networking, but of course that's not possible. But we've arranged to conduct you through a virtual tour of the Pushkin Museum, where we will be guided through the current exhibition on advertising as art, British posters of the late 19th and 20th centuries. Thank you very much to the Pushkin for allowing us to do this and for enabling that trip for our members. The museum, of course, relies on donations, and should you be minded to make a donation after the trip to the exhibition, then there's a link to the donation website from our website, and it would be great if you could donate to this world-class institution. I'm sorry that I won't be joining you for proper drinks and a chat, but I hope that I'll see you early in the new year. It just remains for me now to wish you a very happy Christmas, a safe and a healthy one, and a very prosperous and effective 2021, and healthy one, of course. Wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Roger, for that introduction. And I would like to add my welcome to everyone for RBCC's almost final event of the year. I'd also like to add my thanks again to today's sponsor, Hudson Sandler, and to the Pushkin Museum for affording us the honor of a virtual tour after the panel discussion has finished. As you all know, the theme for today is ESG, an area of ever-increasing importance. And before we take a look at ESG in relation to the retail industry, we're going to take a few minutes to discuss the current trends in the financial sector, which plays such an important role in shaping every industry's attitude to ESG. To do so, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Dmitry Aksakov, who's leading VEB's efforts in developing ESG banking in Russia. Prior to joining VEB in 2019, Dmitry worked as an investment banker focused on private equity funds and tech, firstly for UBS in New York, and then latterly for Deutsche Bank in London. Dmitry graduated with a bachelor's degree from the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. He also has a master's degree from Oxford and an MBA from Yale University. Dmitry, a very warm welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. As we all know, ESG is very much the hot topic at the moment, and I've read that VEB is taking the lead in the financial sector in Russia. Would you mind just bringing us up to date on what progress is being made and any plans for the future?
Thank you, Alf. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be a speaker at the Russo-British Chamber of Commerce event. And I'll be more than happy to discuss the issues of ESG and answer any questions that you may have. Just to give you a little bit of background, why VEB decided to take an active role in developing this movement. Well, first of all, ecology is a very important topic for the Russian leadership. And in recent years, the president of Russia and the members of the government have mentioned numerous times that we need to improve the quality of air in our cities, that we need to improve the quality of drinking water. And ecological problems are now at the forefront of the government's agenda. And the second reason why we decided to pick this up is that this topic has been gathering a lot of attention from the international audience. For example, the European Union has been driving the topic of green finance forward very rapidly. And lately, we have been hearing a lot about the so-called carbon tax, which is essentially a tariff which would be imposed on goods imported into the European Union from countries which produce those goods using technologies which are emitting more harmful waste from the production than the standards set at the European Union. Therefore, we expect that those Russian producers which export to foreign markets, including the European Union, including Britain, and including the United States and other markets, needs to bring their technologies up to a standard in order to be able to compete in those markets, and in order not to face taxes which would make their goods uncompetitive in those markets. Therefore, we as a financial institution decided that we need to develop a framework for the Russian business, first to understand what the ecological requirements are for their goods and for their methods of production. And also we need to provide financial instruments which would allow those companies that need to modernize to raise funds to implement those modernizations, and which would allow those companies which want to build new factories and production facilities to build them up to the highest environmental standards. Therefore, we decided to come up with a so-called ESG framework, which tells the companies what green activities are and how they can finance them.
Great. Okay, thank you. I mean, that's really interesting because there is a perception in the UK and I suppose other Western countries that Russia lags behind other major economies in terms of ESG. Do you think that's a fair assessment? How do you see the situation?
I think to an extent, this assessment is fair. Even this year, we've seen some significant ecological accidents. For example, the one in the Arctic region in Russia, which you have all heard about. And we realized that many of Russian companies, even the large ones, even the ones which rely on international investors and international consumers, still still do not have all of their facilities up to internationally accepted standards. And we realized that this is indeed a problem. However, this year, especially this year, we've been hearing a lot of positive news from Russian companies. Just today, I met with the chief financial officer of one of Russia's major fertilizer producers. And he said that this year, ESG has been on their near the top of their agenda, because everyone, their consumers, their investors, and even the Russian government and their Russian counterparties have been asking a lot of questions about their ecological track record and their plans regarding improving their technology. Therefore, although I would agree that many of our companies, even large ones, lag behind our European and British counterparts in terms of ecological standards, they start to realize that this is very important. And many of them are already taking active steps in this direction.
Yeah, thank you, Dimitri. I suppose what is also true is the problems facing Russia are far greater than perhaps in other parts of the world. And I'm thinking really of all the sort of oil storage facilities which sit upon sort of permafrost, which everyone now acknowledges is melting. And I suppose that's just a huge issue which will require a fair element of government support to help companies make that adjustment.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to comment on that. That's slightly...
Well, Russia is definitely the largest country on Earth in terms of territory.
Yes,
and
sure.
this means that the ecological problems that we are facing are enormous. And our success in this area also affects the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. How do national standards of business conduct compare with those of other major countries?
Well, to be honest, I would break down ESG into environmental, social, and governance issues. To speak broadly about commercial standards, I would say that the governance at Russian major companies, which are listed on international exchanges and which borrow actively in international capital markets, the governance has been relatively well. I would say for some companies it has been very well. It's up to highest international standards. They have they have independent directors, they have the right management structure, they have the right incentives, etc., because all the investors keep a very close eye on how they're doing in this area. But environmental and social issues, they have been lagging behind in many respects. But as I said, a lot of attention has been paid to these areas this year. In the environmental area, all the large companies that I have spoken with, and these are probably top 20 Russian companies in terms of market capitalization, they all said that the environmental issues are near the top of their agenda, and they are thinking very actively about how to deal with it. And the social issues, essentially treating their workers right, treating the disadvantaged populations which live in the areas where they have production facilities, treating those people right, has been also at the center of their agenda. And there are two sources of pressure on them: the international source and the national source now.
Good. Okay. And that really leads nicely into my next question, which is, I mean, those ESG standards, I think it's fair to say, have been around slightly longer in the UK and other Western European countries, and of course the USA as well. And they're sort of fast crystallizing into a recognized system.
Right.
I think the audience would find it very interesting why Russia sees it necessary to develop a separate ESG framework, or what's the sort of thinking behind that?
Sure. Well, to be perfectly honest with you, we have drawn a lot of inspiration from international standards. We decided not to reinvent the wheel, but to come up with standards which are very transparent and understandable to our international partners. By the way, we have published our green financing guidelines on our website, both in Russian and in English, and everyone is welcome to go to veb.ru and go to the Sustainable Development section and see our standards. And if you look closely at the standards, you would recognize a lot of things which you would see in the International Capital Market Association standards, which you would see in the Climate Bonds Initiative standards, and which you would also see in the EU taxonomy. So we decided to make it very, very clear and understandable to our international partners. But the question is, why develop our own standards if they are so similar to the one in existence internationally? Well, we want to link our standards to special support measures from the government for ESG compliant projects. And in order to link support measures such as subsidies, such as tax breaks, such as special regulation from the central bank to meeting certain standards, these standards need to be codified. They need to be put into official Russian documents. So our standards are essentially these official documents, which would be ratified by the Russian government. And another reason for doing our own standards is that even in international standards, such as European taxonomy, there are still many gray areas. There are some activities which are either can be considered green or they cannot be considered green. There is still debate about those issues. And our goal is to have a seat at the table with our international colleagues to also take part in those discussions and develop those gray areas together.
Right. And just out of curiosity, are VEB, are they the lead banking institution, or many banks doing their own initiatives?
Well, we are very glad to see that many Russian banks, especially largest banks such as Sberbank, VTB, Gazprom Bank, they have all been very active in exploring this area. And we're also delighted to see that some of smaller regional banks, such as Bank Center Invest from Rostov-on-Don, is also are working very actively on their ESG agenda. They are improving their own standards. They are coming up with green financing products. But VEB has been designated by the Russian government on November the 18th, if I'm correct. It has been officially designated as the methodologist, as the body which determines which activities can be considered as green.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that. As is so often the case, it's all about perception, and you either get that right or you don't. But how do you communicate this ESG to what is often a fairly skeptical public audience?
Right. A year ago, a lot of our events, a lot of our attempts to discuss these issues, unfortunately, fell on deaf ears. But right now, I think even in the past 3 months, we have hosted, I would say, about 10 events devoted to this issue, to which we invited different parties, representatives from the business, from stock exchanges, not only Russian, but also international. We've had an event with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. We've had events for investors, for the scientific community, etc., etc. So we have been promoting these issues very actively, and all of our attempts to promote them have been very well received. And on the international arena, we hope to utilize our expert council. We are assembling an expert council at VEB, devoted specifically to these issues. And our idea is that one half of this council would consist of international experts, such as representatives from ICMA, the International Capital Markets Association, Climate Bonds Initiative, investment funds, international banks, etc. And we hope to promote our efforts through this channel as well.
And are you finding much enthusiasm from the international side for your efforts?
Fortunately for us, yes. It was our concern at first that we would not be taken seriously by the international community because we were starting late, and our partners could say, well, you could just use what we have come up with and not do any work on your part. But we have seen a lot of enthusiasm from our Western partners and Eastern partners as well, by the way.
Of course, yeah. Great. Okay. Can I ask you, what are the key challenges you sort of foresee in moving financial institutions towards not only ESG compliance, but really more towards long-term value creation?
Well, although the topic of bringing our institutions to the highest ESG standards sounds right, sounds like a very noble mission, still we see that many financial institutions still don't see being compliant with the highest ESG standards as part of their bottom line. Bottom line is still viewed as financial, as purely financial by many institutions. Not the largest ones. The largest banks are realizing that this is very important, but for the smaller ones, the financial bottom line is still much more important than meeting ecological, social goals. And this is the challenge. This is the cultural problem, I would say. But us promoting these values as well as others, and I believe Russo-British Chamber of Commerce can play a role here as well by stressing the importance of these issues for Russian counterparts. We all together can bring us to a new green world. Yes,
yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, as it happens, we had our biggest forum of the year happens in October. It's called the Russia Talk Investment Forum. And one of the 4 panels was ESG. And in fact, we had one of the companies you were mentioning who had the oil spill, and they gave a very interesting talk on that. And obviously, huge embarrassment for them, but they were making a huge effort to put that right. And I see this very much a theme for 2021 as well, which it will certainly continue, because obviously it will continue to be the theme of the moment. Great. We've sort of talked about it in some of your earlier comments, but there are a huge number of ESG classifications and ratings from all the various institutions. And I think a lot of people find it really confusing that a company could be classified as highly sustainable by one rating agency, but then substandard by a different one. And, you know, I thought this has got to be an important issue, you know, and I know everyone calls it greenwashing because it fundamentally will undermine the public's trust in green finance. Very interested on your views on that, and if there's anything practical we can do to sort of overcome it.
Sure. I have been doing some research on why this happens in Europe and other parts of the world. And the reason is that there has not been a single standard which is viewed as universal by everyone. There are different standards which are gradually converging to each other. And as our European colleagues have been telling us, eventually they hope that the standards would converge to such an extent that there would not be such discrepancies between different ratings. In Russia, obviously, there are also, because until now, there has not been a single standard, that there have also been some contradictions between different ratings. But in order to avoid the notion of greenwashing that you have mentioned, we want to start, we want to have, to select our pilot projects very carefully. We want to do the projects which would be seen as universally green by everyone, which would be seen as green by according to the Chinese taxonomy, according to the European taxonomy, and according to the Russian taxonomy. And we are going to expand gradually from there, venturing into areas which are less explored at the moment.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Dmitry. I think we've got probably time for one more question. And again, you alluded to it in your previous comments. Can you talk to us a little bit about what ESG compliant projects are in the pipeline, and maybe talk a little bit about how those came about and the sort of ESG hurdles companies had to sort of overcome?
Right. At VEB, we have 3 areas of priority for us. One is the high value-added production, essentially factories, large factories. The second area is the urban economy, and the third area is infrastructure. The first area obviously is associated with the largest projects, and the ESG projects that we see in the high value-added area is essentially modernizing Russian factories with the latest ESG compliant technologies, or building new factories which are up to highest environmental standards. With regards to urban economy, examples of ESG projects are modernizing the urban transportation. For example, replacing diesel-powered buses with electricity-powered buses, or hydrogen buses, expanding the electric transportation, and replacing city lights with more energy efficient lights. And with regards to infrastructure, examples of projects are using ecologically friendly materials, such as ash from burning various things for building roads, for example, or building energy efficient airports and seaports, etc. So these are the priority areas for ESG projects for us as a development bank.
Great. Okay, that I'm afraid is all we have time for. As I said earlier, ESG is not going away anytime soon, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk to you next year, hopefully, if you will come back on to hear how some of these projects are developing and to get a further update on how the framework for the banking sector is going. Thank you very much for your insights. Good luck with all your projects, and I hope you'll stay for the rest of the forum.
Thank you very much, Alf. Delighted to be here, and thank you again for the invitation.
No, pleasure. Thank you very much, Dimitri. I'd now like to hand over to Andrew Hayes. He's managing partner at Hudson Sandler, and that for our next activity, which is a discussion about ESG and the retail sector. Many of you will know Andrew. For those who don't, he's one of the most experienced financial and corporate PR advisors in Europe, and he's heavily involved in the firm's Russian practice. Andrew, if you're there, thank you very much. And we're all very much looking forward to hearing the panel.
Spasiba, Alf, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you very much for inviting Hudson Sandler to sponsor today's forum, which is a great honor for us, given all the brilliant work you and your team are doing, Alf, in challenging times to build trade and investment flows between our countries. So we're very, very pleased to have the opportunity to support it today. By way of background, Hudson Sandler is a leading strategic communications and sustainability consultancy working in Russia, where we've been active for 12 years, supporting many fantastic clients across virtually every sector of the economy, from our offices here in London, as well as our offices in Moscow and Hong Kong. Now, today's panel discussion is focused on how the Russian consumer is putting or not putting sustainability at the heart of its relationships with brands as we enter, hopefully, a post-pandemic world over 2021. Conventional wisdom is, as we've just heard, is that Russian consumers are behind those in the West when it comes to paying up to tackle climate change and social dislocation. But that easy assumption belies many of the realities we're about to discuss. To discuss them, I'm delighted to have 5 expert panelists here today. Firstly, Rebecca Gudgeon, who is a colleague of mine at Hudson Sandler and our partner heading up our HS Sustain franchise, focused on environmental, social and governance for clients who want a differentiated approach to cut through all the noise around ESG. Secondly, Michael O'Brien, who is the Senior Corporate Governance Specialist at BNY Mellon, giving him a unique insight into why 85% of investors are willing to pay a 10% premium to acquire stocks with a positive ESG record over ones with a negative profile, according to McKinsey. Thirdly, Maxime Contin is Chief Storyteller at Dodo Brands, a really fascinating international group developing a portfolio of digital-first QSR brands, perhaps best known for its pizza business, which is now the market leader in Russia by some way and operating in 13 countries. Fourthly, David Henderson Stewart, who is managing director at the Rakita Watch Factory, where iconic watches are engineered that were used by Soviet cosmonauts and polar explorers, now focused on providing precision watches for the discerning buyer. And finally, but by no means least, Irina Anshushina, who is Director for Sustainable Business and Corporate Affairs for Unilever in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. So good afternoon, panelists. Delighted to have you here today.
Andrew, sorry, can I just interrupt? We can't see you. Are you sat away from the video camera?
No.
Okay, well, you're if you can get closer, that might help.
I can't get any closer. I'll be kissing it, Alf.
Okay, sorry then. Okay, we can hear you perfectly though. So sorry.
I don't know what's wrong there. And let me have another go. Is that? Can you see me now?
No, you're sort of floating. You're half in, half out of the screen. Which when it happens to me, it's because of the distance from the video camera.
Is that better?
I know the room that Andrew's in. Andrew,
okay.
If you move towards the video camera and TV screen on the wall, we will be able to see you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Sorry about this, everybody.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, almost.
Is that better? Is that better?
A bit, but not quite.
Tell you what, Alf, why don't we carry on? And I'm not particularly attractive.
Yeah, okay, carry on. Yeah, I think that's good. Sorry for interrupting. Thanks.
Thanks for that, but I think we'll carry on. I'm sorry you can't see me, but I don't think you're missing much, I promise you. Now, as to questions for those joining from the forum, please submit them through the chat icon, and I'll pick up as many as time allows during the conversation. And also, given time constraints and the breadth of the subject we're discussing, I've asked panelists to keep their answers relatively brief and sharp if you can. Panelists, thank you very much. So, first question, let me start up with a general question about whether the pandemic has accelerated or held up the focus of Russia's consumers on healthy choices and sustainability more generally in your various sectors. Can I ask you first, Irina?
So hello everyone, I hope I'm not floating and everybody can see me pretty well. So yeah, actually I represent a company which operates in the FMCG market, and you know, to be honest, we're one of the few lucky ones who weren't really affected highly by the pandemic, because you know, we produce soap and soup, as we say, and most of the products are basically of essential consumer needs. But in general, I would say that definitely we have seen some emerging trends, especially when the pandemic struck. So obviously we have seen a rising interest towards cleansing agents like Domestos, for example. It was super popular at that point of time, even despite the fact that some consumer view it as a high price solution for home care. We have seen a significant surge in the consumption of soap, and both liquid and regular soap was popular regardless of the region. So it was one of the, you know, highest in demand products that Unilever produced at that point of time. Interestingly, we have seen an increased consumption of tea, because you know, people moved to their homes from the offices, and you know, obviously coffee is usually consumed as something, as a solution for you to, you know, start to kick off the day in the office in the morning. And we saw that tea has become a much more preferred solution for most of the consumers who worked from home. We have seen a slight change in the consumption of hairstyle products, obviously, because you know, people would mostly use them to go to work, from work, for any other out of home occasion. That was not the case anymore. Interestingly, we don't see this trends much for the next year. So we have recently been looking into the analytics provided by our partnering agencies, and we see that some of the trends were mostly temporary, basically. And I don't know if this is connected mostly with the optimism of our consumers, believing that next year we somehow magically will switch back to office modes. But you know, we'll see. Obviously, this affected some of our some of our decisions in terms of how we appeared at points of sales. So we try to not to actually push the products in demand, but to try and inform our consumers in the most appropriate way, that they can not only buy just the products of our brand, but products of other brands as well. This is what, for example, our global brand Lifebuoy soap brand has been doing. So when they communicated to consumers, they actually said that you can use a Lifebuoy soap or any other brand of soap that you would like to use, even a competitor one. So yeah, we have seen this, you know, as an FMCG company, we have seen some shifts, but generally was really encouraging is that we still continue to operate for the needs of the consumers. And what's important, that all of our factories stayed operational, because we saw that our products were still in need for most of the population.
Thank you very much, Irina. Interesting. Tea sales have gone up in Russia at home, and alcohol sales have gone down. I think we've seen the reverse dynamic here in the UK. Maxime, can I ask you next, please? Dodo's experience of how the pandemic's impacting trading, particularly around healthy eating agendas, if at all.
Oh yeah, thanks. Well, I have to say that in my view, the sustainability question is quite tricky in the food service industry in general, all over the world, but it was especially tricky here in Russia during the pandemic. To begin with, I think that we don't see that huge demand for the sustainability policies, neither from our customers nor from the government. I would say that it wasn't top on the priority list for both of these groups, and it was before the pandemic, and the pandemic made it even worse in three ways. Firstly, it's obvious that the food service industry was hit the hardest in this pandemic, or among the hardest hit on industries everywhere in Russia as well. And secondly, we see that the demand is growing in delivery, and delivery is unfortunately a sector which is infamous for its huge waste, because everything that is delivered has to be packed, and while doing deliveries, we are doing a lot of we are producing a lot of waste, and also every delivery is delivered usually by car, and it's another contribution to the carbon emissions. And the third factor is probably that we, of course, as a society, as a population, we want to stop the virus and to make it spread as slowly as possible. And hygiene plays a great role here, and it increases our impact on the environment as well, because right now, for example, the government introduced new regulations. Under these regulations, we have to wear gloves in the kitchen when we are cooking. It's questionable. It can be debatable whether it's a proper solution in terms of hygiene and the fight against the virus. Because for example, in our experience, and I think that a lot of people from the restaurant industry would agree with me, in our experience, it's much safer and easier to control hygiene standards when you cook with your bare hands and wash them regularly than with gloves. But the regulations are here, and we follow them. But these produce lots of used gloves, totally non-recyclable, obviously, and we as an industry are producing lots of so our footprint is becoming even more unsustainable than it was before the pandemic. So we have, to sum it up, we have operators who are fighting for their survival, and of course, when you are fighting for the survival, you aren't thinking about long-term effects of your business or of your actions. We have growing delivery, which is worse than dine-in in many aspects, or can be worse than dine-in. And I'm not talking about our company, but across the sector. And thirdly, we see government and hygiene standards that producing lots of waste. And so, in terms of your question about healthy habits, we don't actually see anything like that. People are happy to have a meal delivered to them, because sometimes their options for dining in are limited, and so they are happy to eat whatever they like, and maybe even more. They are willing to more indulge in unhealthy eating than before the crisis, obviously, because of the pressure everyone is feeling. That's about it.
Who can resist a delicious dodo pizza? Who can resist it?
Oh yeah, nobody.
And David, in the world of watches, and watches, of course, do not have chips or batteries, and perhaps take a slightly longer term view, do you think the pandemic is going to have any impact on how your brand is regarded and to your advantage in the longer term, or is it can be exaggerated?
Well, I personally didn't notice in any way that the pandemic has increased the focus of Russians towards sustainability, at least in my sector. What I did know, I mean, the focus towards sustainability basically is changing your behaviors in a way that makes it more difficult, doing things that you wouldn't do otherwise. I was very surprised how much Russians are disciplined in terms of social distancing and wearing masks and gloves and all of that. So to some extent, I think I was surprised, and I think it shows that Russians can change their behavior. That's all I can say in terms of in our sector, because in terms of sustainability.
Thank you. And Rebecca, wouldn't that reflect what we're seeing here in the UK as well as Russia? It hasn't really, it's probably pushed it slightly down the agenda. I don't know, would you agree with that?
I think it very much depends on the company. Certainly with some of the big industrial companies where we do a lot of work with Russian big industrial companies, we've seen corporates sacrifice things like certain board committees and other investment opportunities before they sacrificed their sustainability commitments over the last year. And actually, this year, Magnet launched an absolutely amazing sustainability strategy. We know Lenta's along the same roads as well. And I think there are two reasons why what we've observed in terms of our Russian clients, why that's happened. And that's about sustainability covering much more. Sustainability is a catch-all term, and it can be anything. It can be environmental, it can be social, it can be governance, it can be the whole piece. And I think the focus is very much, because of the pandemic, has very much been on the social piece of that, and actually just responding to that has kind of driven quite a lot of the sustainability strategies, or the delivery of sustainability strategies over the last year. And then I think also there are a lot of companies we work with who are very aware that they might be listed on Western stock exchanges or have investors with a Western mindset. And they're all looking to the economy post-pandemic, so they all want to make sure that they emerge from this period in a good, strong place to be able to have the ESG profile that they want from day one post-pandemic.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm picking that up on that, Michael. In your experience, what kind of valuation premium can Russian corporates realistically expect from international investors if they rate highly on ESG metrics?
Thank you, Andrew. It's difficult to say, quite honestly. We haven't really seen a whole lot of research focused on Russia specifically with regards to premium valuations caused by ESG, but there certainly has been a lot of research internationally looking more broadly. As a matter of fact, MSCI had conducted a survey on this, or did a research paper that just came out last year with regards to the premium valuations that can be expected. They looked at a basket of stocks from 2007 to 2017, about 1,600 stocks that looked at if they have higher ESG ratings and what kind of impact it has on valuations. What they really found was that typically if you see higher ESG ratings, you will see higher valuations. There's typically a lag period of about 3 years though. So what they're generally seeing is that if you have ratings increases, that it's really ratings increase momentum that's causing the higher valuations, not the higher valuations themselves. And, I think it's important to really, put that in context to a certain degree. It's not the ESG ratings and having the higher ESG ratings that causes the higher valuation. It's the things that went into you getting that higher ESG rating. So, it's not like there's a whole lot of international investors out there that are investing based on ESG ratings. They're looking at the things that have caused it. So, that you need to be, very careful about not assigning causation when there's correlation. So typically we see the ratings, typically see we increases in valuation. I think one of the common things that we see amongst our issuer clients, they'll talk about, hey, we've made these initiatives, we've put resources into this. We really haven't seen anything that's come to fruition as far as the valuation is concerned. I think you need to kind of, put it in context of, first of all, Rome wasn't built in a day. As I say, what we see as far as the research is there tends to be a lag why this is, recognized by the market. And two, you need to be realistic about what are the initiatives that you've actually put into place. Were they material, or were they more low-hanging fruit? So, again, it's the market's is going to invest based on what they see from an operational, competitive point of view, from a strategy point of view, and that is the offshoot of enhanced ESG practices. Again, it's not the ESG rating that's going to drive this.
Michael, just a quick supplementary on that, please, before we move on. Is the G in ESG under more scrutiny in Russia than other markets you operate in, or is that a shibboleth that we shouldn't pay too much attention to?
I think there is certainly an amount of scrutiny that is higher within Russia based on the framework of the marketplace. As everyone knows, there's a lot of government ownership, a lot of majority ownership by wealthy individuals, and that is not really indicative of best practices from a governance perspective. That typically leads to fewer independent directors. That shows up within the committees, within the board of directors, less scrutiny on related party transactions. So I think there's certainly more scrutiny on it. And that's kind of the anecdotal kind of thought on it. I actually kind of tested that premise though by looking at the database from MSCI and looked at the weighting that Russia has with regards to governance versus all the other countries. And in looking at that, we saw that Russia, as far as the weighting, rated on average 64th among 75 countries that receive weighting. So it's not as though Russia is the only country that has some of these kind of systematic issues with regards to majority ownership and the impact it has from a governance point of view. The interesting thing was when we looked at, again, the MSCI research, as far as where's the weighting directed from an E, S, and G angle, it's all pretty equal. Governance only slightly led, they were about 34%. The rest is around 32%. But when we compared that to other countries, environmental was the thing where really Russia stood out as far as a lot of emphasis from a weighting perspective. They ranked 6th of 75 companies, even though, again, it was only about 32%, which shows us, again, based on the economy in Russia, which has a lot of extractive industries, that's why it's so high. So again, governance certainly scrutinized, but again, I think it's more important is the industries that you're in, as far as the companies, and the materiality of the issues. So that's what we're seeing.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now, the question I really want to direct at Maxime and Irina. Perhaps Maxime first. How important is community engagement to your brand propositions, and what initiatives have you put in place to support in this area?
Well, I have to say here that we are a franchise. We are in the franchising business, so only a handful of our, a few dozens of pizza shops in our network are company owned. The rest are launched by our franchisee partners. So every franchisee partner is highly engaged in their local communities, obviously, and being active locally is a great part of how they do business and how they connect with their customers. That's it.
And Irina, I mean, obviously Unilever puts a huge focus on this area globally. How does that play out in the Russian context?
So yeah, this is actually true in terms of the global agenda, because I think early, like 2 weeks after the pandemic struck, we announced our intention globally to invest 100 million euros to support communities and international organizations in tackling this agenda. And being a FMCG company, as I already mentioned, makes the task easier. So what we did in Russia, we outlined the communities in need, not only the consumers, but also the hospitals, for example, and schools, who required immediate supplies of products like home care and soap. What we did, we outlined an outreach program which span across 5 cities where our factories are present. So that would be Moscow, where we have the central office, Tula region, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, and Omsk. And in total, we managed to donate about 80 tons of our products, which are worth of roughly 400k euro market value. And that was actually one of the immediate actions that we had to do, not just being present on the shelf, but trying to provide our products to the people in need as much as possible.
Thank you, Irina. And Rebecca, I know you do a lot of work with clients across Russia in this area as well.
Yes, and I think it's interesting. Russia's really interesting. We work with clients across the world, and while we've seen a marked increase in the last 2 to 3 years of clients from any part of the world looking to build a sustainability strategy. And I completely agree with Michael. You can't have an ESG rating that means anything unless you've got all the work behind it. Your ESG rating is a reflection of your sustainability profile and the commitments you're making and the programs you have in place to actually meet those goals. But what I think is unusual about Russia is, and what we certainly see, particularly in the heavy industrial side, is the kind of the mono-industry towns and how that drives a different sort of social license to operate. So we saw it with one of our clients, Rusal, who have a load of aluminium smelting operations in and around the Irkutsk region in Siberia. When the pandemic hit, the first thing they did was build a hospital for COVID patients. And it was a Rusal responsibility to build the hospital. It wasn't a state responsibility. It was something that they just knew they had to do. Then no one asked them to do it. They did it because there is this sort of, when everyone in a town or a city works within a certain industry or within a certain employer, then there is a much stronger social sort of license to operate that sort of is in place there. So yes, we've definitely seen a real increase in the kind of the tangible outputs of what Russian corporates are doing in terms of community engagement over the last 10 months.
Yeah, you saw big business in Russia certainly seems to have had more of a role than we would have seen here in the UK and other Western markets. And David, I can ask you a question sort of related to this. How much does sustainability messaging play into your overall brand marketing? I mean, are you actively trying to build Raketa as a sustainable brand or a luxury brand that just happens to be responsible?
Well, sustainability is not the main message that we're trying to get across. Our main message is promoting, values like the cosmos and other Russian, achievements.
Yeah.
But sustainability definitely is one of the messages, which is important for us and especially important for our customers. Our sellers in shops, they use the argument that goes along the way to say that these watches don't have any batteries or electronics. So basically, you'll never have to throw them away. They can run indefinitely as long as you take care of them. Unlike many Swiss brands, there's a kind of tradition in Swiss brands is that the more expensive the watch is, the bigger the box is. And a lot of people criticize that. We had big boxes at the beginning because we tried to copy the Swiss, and now we try to do things a bit differently. We have very small boxes, and people appreciate this. And these are cardboard boxes, which obviously are recyclable. So it's not the main message, but it is an important message. And our clients in Russia do understand that, especially the first argument that says that these watches are totally ecological because they can run forever, indefinitely, and you will never have to throw them away.
It's interesting, and David, just a supplementary, looking at it from another perspective, when you're looking for investors to come into the business, presumably they're looking at how ecologically responsible your production facilities are very closely.
Yes, so we are raising equity at the moment, and we are talking to one particular foreign investor. It's a professional investor, and we were very surprised how much he paid attention to. Basically, he wanted to know exactly how we disposed of our hazardous waste, and we do have hazardous waste, which is chemical products, oil, mercury lamps. And he not only wanted to know the names of the companies, he also wanted to see the contracts. He wanted to make sure there was an official contract, there was no cash involved. And he also wanted to, he was surprised that some of these companies didn't have licenses. So in Russia, you can dispose of certain hazardous waste to companies that don't necessarily need a license. And this investor was quite surprised. And I do know that he asked his lawyers to double check this information. So they did some legal research and they confirmed this. So we were very surprised how deep they went into trying to understand how much we conformed with all the rules in terms of waste disposal.
Very good. And David, can I recommend very strongly that you use Rebecca Gudgeon to help you in that dialogue in future? Arena, can I ask you a question, please? Are you seeing any regional variations in the sustainability agenda, particularly between Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the regions, where I'm told it is often local authorities that take more of an effective lead than federal bodies?
Yeah, I would say there are two angles where we can actually approach this. So coming back to your first question and not seeing any differences and how people reacted to the sustainability agenda, I would like to recall a purely, sustainability related project that we're running both in Moscow and in some of the regions. This is the reverse vending machines, which we have installed with our retail partners to collect plastic bottles. And obviously, this is something where the actual presence of consumers and their ability to visit those stores is directly affected. What we have seen is that when in April, for example, there was a huge lockdown across Russia for quite a while, we have seen obviously a significant decrease in how many bottles were submitted to these reverse vending machines. What we have not seen is that since we have those machines installed in 5 different regions, the dynamics of how actively people try to use these machines was basically the same. We actually have 2 of them installed in Krasnodar and Magnit, which was mentioned by Rebecca previously. So probably it has to do a bit with the image of Magnit being a rising sustainable retailer. We have not seen any difference in activity between consumers who wanted to get rid of their plastic bottles in Moscow versus consumers who wanted to do this in Krasnodar, which actually is quite inspiring for us. And it actually inspired us to extend the regional chain of reverse vending machines next year. So that's going to be a huge piece of use we're going to announce very soon. What we have seen is that indeed the regional authorities have reacted quite differently. In some cases, they have reacted even more actively than the federal authorities, even in terms of how they treated the businesses and how they included them in the list of so-called systemic enterprises. So in some regions we had to wait for a long time for this to happen, and it obviously affected the way how we could support our employees in getting the necessary permits for their work, in how they could even now get some of the vaccines right now or get tested from COVID. So yeah, and this is, when we discuss this with our management, we have actually seen some interesting comparison with how it works in the US, for example, where the regional agenda is like super strong, and each of the states is like very self-servant, I would say. And this is something that in our experience, Russia has seen. And in some regions, it was actually easier for us to do community outreach, specifically in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, obviously. We had to tackle some of the bureaucratic issues when dealing with other city regional authorities. I don't know, either either because they weren't really feeling the need for the companies to help them, or to some other reasons. But yeah, we have seen slight differences. We talk about that.
Very interesting. Now, a question for you all. I think moving away from the pandemic, it's related to the pandemic, but as we all know, real living standards in Russia are now under pressure. Do you think that Russia consumers going forward, and let's take a longer term view on this, if the economic situation remains challenging, are they going to regard, for instance, high quality food provenance or ecological friendly packaging as more of a luxury that they can forego in the short term for lower prices, and that catching up with Western standards is being put back or put on hold as people come under more pressure? Perhaps I can put that to Maxime first.
What I can say here is that, as I said before, we don't see customers pushing us to be more sustainable. We don't see the government pushing us to be more sustainable. What we are doing, we decided at some point that we want to lead here, and it coincided that just this year we publicly committed to double down on sustainability as a group. And right now we are actually assessing everything that we are doing in terms of our packaging, our supply chain, in terms of our own practices in the office. And we have like around 300 people just working for the managing company. There were already some like interesting revelations when we separated our trash, like plastic and paper and the rest, and our business office was collecting it. But when we started to like investigate what happens next with this trash, and we realized that most of the trash that goes, for example, in plastic, actually isn't thrown away basically, because it can be recycled, and the current infrastructure can't process it. So we are rethinking our own even strategy in terms of like our small office waste, and we are rethinking our big strategy for like packaging. We are looking for the most innovative, cutting-edge solutions from all over the world, what we can introduce, and we are doing it because we feel that it's the right time for us. We used to be a very small company that was like fighting for survival every day. Right now, we have some resources, and we can do it. And if we can do it, we are going to do it. But in terms of like the demand, I'd like to like say it again. We don't see that like pushing for it. That's how we see it.
Thank you, and that's very interesting insight into the Russian dynamic. Irina, Unilever is obviously a huge global business. Do you see very different dynamics between paying up to stop climate change and higher prices in different countries? Are they very different experiences, or is that completely the wrong way to look at it in any event?
If we don't talk about pandemic, right, in general, so I would say that the climate agenda is quite new for us. We have been doing a lot of stuff around plastic, like I mentioned previously. It's been like super high on everything that Unilever does. Climate agenda is gaining more ground externally, and this is actually one of our top priorities for the upcoming 5 years. What we have not seen is actually first of all, the understanding of consumers of how this should be dealt with. So a huge responsibility here lies with us and our partners to try and educate consumers maybe on where their responsibility lies and how we tackle this agenda. And second of all, if we talk about the government, so we've been trying to drive this one on some of our platforms where we cooperate with the ministries. And the only probably small step that we have seen is the recent decree of the president, with the famous number 666, which actually pushes for more ambitious goals in terms of carbon emissions. And this is something where I believe we can play a larger role. We have a huge agenda related to sustainable logistics, and we try to approach it specifically this year, despite all of this pandemic issues that we're facing. And we see that probably Russia is going to be one of the last countries in the Unilever list to tackle this one, because we don't really have immediate solutions for that for our business. So it's going to be a huge challenge for us to make happen.
That's very interesting. And Rebecca, I know you're doing a huge amount of work, for instance, in Africa, where incomes are obviously very low compared to Russia and developed markets in the West, but a huge focus on this area nevertheless.
I think it's global, and I think where you have a consumer base that is either doesn't have the social, financial inclusion that perhaps we would expect, then there really is a focus. So I don't think that kind of social piece is, and the part the consumer plays is unique to Russia at all.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Michael, perhaps if I can ask you from an investment perspective, Russian companies' adoption of ESG values, what stage are we at now? How would you characterize where Russia is in terms of adopting these metrics and embedding them in their operations and their investment propositions?
I think we've seen significant gains over the last 5 to 10 years, without a doubt. I've been with BNY Mellon for 10 years in an ESG capacity, and I work globally also, and particularly from a governance perspective, Russia is by far the clientele that I engage with that is looking to make the most amount of gains there. So I think you've come a long way, but as I kind of pointed out before with some of the rating statistics, which I have, I think it's demonstrated that there's still a way to go. Again, looking at those 75 companies or countries that MSCI has ratings on, and which is not to insist that ratings are the end all be all for everything. But of the 75, Russia currently is ranked 64th of those. So there's still a ways to go. We've seen a lot of gains. I think the important thing to realize is that there's certainly a perception from a country characteristics, but investors look at companies on an individual basis. And if you're outperforming your peers, both globally and locally, that will be reflected in the valuations and the demand that you have for the stock.
Thank you, Michael. Can I remind everybody, please send in your questions through the chat device, and I will try to put them to the panel. One's come in for you, Maxime. It's from Olga Petrina. Will it be possible to use copters for delivering your food in Russia or in the UK? And is it something you're looking at?
Olga, thank you for the question. I think I know where it's coming from, because as far back as 2014, we launched the world's first ever real commercial pizza delivery by drone. But it was quite a success and made the waves all over the world. But we had to shut this operation down because there weren't basically any regulations in place back then. And to be honest, I don't see it's happening in the near future, especially in the city landscape, because drones still they have to be like they are very heavy if they have to be to carry a heavy weight, like for example a pizza or a few boxes with pizza, and it can be pretty dangerous for if the drone basically falls. And I think there is some potential in drone delivery in rural areas, like, I don't know, in New Zealand, where there are like all these fields, and it's much easier to cross this field and reach some distant area with the drone than going on the road. And but yeah, since we are talking about sustainability, I don't think that this is the area you would like to be focused if you want to like make a difference in sustainability. I think the packaging and using the most obvious like ways of transportation, like e-bikes, scooters, it's a better way to tackle this.
Thank you, Maxime. And David, coming back to packaging and your focus on small packaging that's more sustainable, when you export, does that become an issue and you need to be closer to the Swiss model? Or do you find international purchasers are in line with your thinking on this?
No, everyone appreciates to receive a small package. Well, first of all, when you go to a shop, and imagine you're a tourist, you buy a big box, it's much more difficult to transport back home, right? So everyone appreciates the small box, and everyone is very aware that a small box is much better than a big box in terms of sustainability. And we communicate on this topic, and this is something people like and understand, and across all over the world, as well as in Russia, as well as outside Russia.
Thank you. And Michael, again, from your perspective, which companies in the Russian market do you think have succeeded best in communicating their ESG agenda and embedding it in their business models? Who are the poster boys and girls in Russia, as far as you can see?
Are you asking from a sector point of view, or are you asking from a company point of view?
Well, I think sector would be interesting. You may feel it's too sensitive to pick out companies, but I'll leave it to you.
Well, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, and this is certainly, there's no denying that, you know, that Russia is very much an extractive industry that's what leads the economy there. So there's certainly some difficulties from that point of view, from an ESG and sustainability point of view. So that kind of clouds the country overall. So from that perspective, we look at those that are outside of that industry, certainly those in the service industry or the grocery industry, where again, sustainability measures are easier to communicate and not tied to the environmental taint, so to speak, that we see in those other industries. So that's generally where we see the communication is best.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We worked with Magnet on the launch of their sustainability strategy recently, and it really is a world-class program. Benchmarks very, very credibly against big global leaders. And Rebecca, your work you're doing in Siberia, you're doing a lot of work in a certain very ecologically sensitive lake. How would you characterize, I mean, in terms of working with the authorities, working with the leaders of the businesses you're supporting, how would you benchmark that experience against what you've been doing elsewhere in the world, particularly in the fishing industry, for instance?
Thank you. I think Russia, and yes, Andrew's right, we do a lot of work around Lake Baikal, which is the world's oldest, largest lake and contains a fifth of the world's natural fresh water. And it is a UNESCO heritage site as well, and has a lot of endemic species. And so we're doing quite a lot of work on programs with our clients, on programs around protecting the quality of the lake, not least because it actually is used to generate hydropower, which goes to generate the electricity that powers the whole of Siberia. So there is a very practical usage for this. So the lake has to be kept in tip-top condition. I would say that there is, because of the sort of federal nature of the government around Lake Baikal, it has been perhaps problems that would have been addressed sooner in other parts of the world are now being addressed. But again, we're seeing the corporates lead on that, and it being a push on the federal government to actually put the regulation in place that will stop the heavy metals leaking out of water treatment plants into Lake Baikal, rather than, as we see in some other countries where we work, the government imposing regulation upon the corporates. So it is a kind of reverse there. But the reason I think a lot about Siberia, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Siberia and visiting Siberia. I think we've seen a real upturn in the number of Russian companies who are now very rapidly coming towards the process of building a sustainability strategy and doing it in a much more serious way than we see some other companies do it. And I think things like the problem at Norilsk Nickel have really kind of opened everyone's eyes up to perhaps what the potential is. And Norilsk Nickel too, that the incident that happened there to a greater or lesser extent was a result of global warming. So, you know, when the permafrost goes, the whole kind of land that things are built on and resting on actually becomes less stable, then accidents will happen. So I think Russia and Siberia particularly, over the course of 2 months last year, they saw catastrophic fires, droughts, and floods that killed people. So they really are at the sharp end of climate change. So I think there is quite a lot of waking up to the fact that they need to do it. I've actually got some figures. According to the IPCC, Russia's climate increase is set somewhere between 4 and 12 degrees. But on average, they agree about 4.5. It depends who you ask. Now, that is significantly higher than anywhere else in the world. So the IPCC recognises that Russia really is going to suffer. And also, even if you just look at history, since 1960, Russia has heated up. The rate of increase in temperature in Russia has been 2.5 times the global average. And in the permafrost region, so Siberia and eastern northern Siberia, it's been 3 to 4 times faster than anywhere else in the world. So global warming, the climate crisis is having a demonstrable impact on Russia and on Russian business. So I think that is driving quite a lot of this.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Rebecca. Staggering statistics, very interesting. Now, I'm going to ask one final question, the same question to all of the panelists, please, because we're coming to the end of the session. And the question is, can you identify one ESG trend that you think we will see more of in Russia in 2021? Now, Irina, I know Unilever must be modeling this in every way imaginable. What's the one trend we're seeing more of in Russia next year that you would pick out?
I think if we talk about not only next year but probably the next 10 years, we have seen that the ecological environmental agenda has been like super high, and I've mentioned that climate change is going to be, you know, the talk of the day in the upcoming years. But in my opinion, I would say that the social aspects are gaining ground as well, and I would say that tackling inequality specifically in Russia, specifically after this particular year, would be a huge challenge for everyone. So tackling financial inequality, maybe something dealing with how people view the society, the stereotypes. So anything dealing with, you know, inclusivity versus inequality has to be in the spotlight, and will be in the spotlight for sure.
Very interesting. And Maxime, from your perspective at Dodo, is there a trend you think we'll see more of next year in Russia that you think is worth highlighting?
Well, to be honest, I think that all the trends that we are seeing across the globe will come to Russia sooner or later. It's hard to predict which one will land faster, like the next year. But what I can say is that I would definitely hope to see like more effort on the government side, because lots of things, at least where our industry is involved, depends a lot on the infrastructure. For example, for recyclable garbage and things like this. For things like I'm based in Berlin and in Germany, and it goes without saying that every building here has like lots of different trash bins for plastic, for bio garbage, then and others. And unless you have the same infrastructure in Russia, and this infrastructure has to be built by the government, you can do a lot about it, because you can make your pizza boxes the most recyclable ever pizza box on this planet. But if there is no infrastructure to collect them and to recycle them, it will be all in vain. And I see that in Moscow there are first innovations, and this infrastructure is being built, and I believe that it will be coming, and I hope it will be coming to other cities across the country.
Very interesting. And David, can I put the same question to you? But before I do, a question's coming specifically for you, which would also be interesting to have your answer on. It's what difficulties do you meet when promoting Russian brands in Europe? Perhaps we'll just deal with that, and then a trend that you would like to highlight over the coming years.
Well, a very short answer to this question is actually it's much easier to promote Raketa watches outside Russia than in Russia. Yeah. People very much like the fact that we're a niche brand that stands out from the crowd, which carries very strong values linked to Russian achievements in art, avant-garde art, Cosmos submariners, and also that our watches are manufactured in-house. People understand that and appreciate that very much. So actually, we think that promoting our Russian watches and brands outside Russia is much easier than doing the same job in Russia.
Interesting.
In terms of, thank you very much for the question. And in terms of, I agree both with Irina and with Maxim, with Irina, because I also think the ecological topic is a very hot topic at the moment in Russia. And I certainly think that Russians are very much becoming aware of it. And I also agree with Maxime when he says that most of the trends worldwide eventually reach Russia at some point or another. I've lived in Russia for the past 20 years, and I've really seen it. Eventually, everything comes to Russia at some point.
And the same question to you, Rebecca.
I'm going to put I think all the trends we're seeing at the moment will continue and grow, but I'm going to put my money on something slightly different, and that is biodiversity and nature-based solutions. And I think the scale and kind of the natural resources that Russia has at the moment will mean that becomes increasingly important. And when it's kind of linked to the climate thing, when you think that a fifth of the world's forest is in Russia, and the forest is absolutely critical to, as a carbon sink, to sequestering some of the greenhouse gases we're putting out. It's a vital part of addressing the climate crisis. So I think we will see an increased focus on protecting biodiversity and nature-based solutions that will drive that.
Yeah, very interesting. It's what David said in the previous session, that Russia gets this right, the whole world really does benefit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Michael, let's finish with a good old investment perspective. What's going to be the trend in ESG when people look at Russia next year and the year after?
You're certainly throwing me a curveball there at the end. So I'll come back to that in a second. As far as the trends I think that are most important for Russia, again, I point to how energy and the extractive energy is such an important part of it. We're seeing enhanced and more stringent regulations, particularly in Europe, with regards to energy and the use of energy and what's acceptable, particularly from a carbon perspective. So I think looking at Russia is the ability to raise their game with regards to being able to fulfill that need, that demand, and those requirements from a Russian point of view. So coming back to the investment perspective, I think investors are going to be looking quite closely at the ability for Russian companies to, particularly Russian energy companies, to be able to provide the product in the way that the neighboring countries will deem to be acceptable, to do that going forward. I think that Russia is maybe a little behind the curve with regards to renewables. They have such an expansive supply of the traditional energy resources. So I think that'll be looked at closely in the near and longer term.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. That brings us to a close, the panel bit of the forum. I know there's a fascinating virtual tour of the Pushkin Museum about to happen, but I want to say thank you for all the panelists for your time. I hope all of the panelists, except David, because he would have done it already, is going to buy a loved one a Raketa watch for Christmas. The coolest brand you can find. And thank you, everybody. Have a very happy Christmas, and let's hope we all have a prosperous and healthy new year. Alf.
Andrew, many thanks for a really interesting panel discussion. I'm just sorry we didn't see you, although I suppose to a certain extent it is in the Christmas spirit, and you were very much the ghost of Christmas past as you shimmied in and out of a picture. Anyways, I'd also like to add my thanks to the panelists. Fantastic insight there, Michael, Rebecca, Irina, Maxim, and David. And as I said to Dimitri, obviously ESG is the topic of the moment, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time in 2021 to carry on the fascinating discussions. Anyways, without further ado, we'll now move straight into the virtual tour of the Pushkin Museum. And I'd just like to say, please remember there is a link on the website for donations to the museum. Like all museums, Pushkin relies on voluntary donations. And if anyone feels like making a donation, please do so on the link provided. I'd now like to introduce you to our host, Irina Karabanova, who is head of fundraising. In her previous life, she used to work as a counselor for the Russian Deputy Minister for Culture. She's also spent considerable time with UKTI at the British Embassy in Moscow. Irina, a very warm welcome, and thank you very much for organizing this tour to one of the world's great museums. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful to RBCC for the opportunity to join this Winter Forum Online 2020 and welcome you today. We all know that culture is the most important part of our life and of the UK-Russia cooperation. The Pushkin Museum of Fine Arts is the largest museum of European art in Moscow. The museum collection currently includes more than 700,000 paintings, sculptures, drawings, applied works, photographs, and archaeological objects. Today, RBCC launched a donation campaign in favor of our museum. Many thanks. Please join. You can find the link at the RBCC or the Pushkin Museum websites and make your contribution. It can be either small or big. It's up to you. We will be thankful for any contribution you can make. I also invite you to become a member of the museum's Club of Friends. It was founded 6 years ago and it improves every year. Now we have about 2,500 members. We would be happy if your company could be interested in our sponsorship opportunities. Next year, we'll have a number of great exhibitions. Those who are interested, please drop me an email and I'll send you the detailed information. I'll write my contact details in the chat. And now I'm delighted to introduce our guide, Ilya Malachov, who will invite you to the exciting journey to the Pushkin Museum of Fine Arts and the exhibition of British posters. So Ilya, you're welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming and thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing pleasure talking about the British art this London afternoon and Moscow evening. I'm an art historian and the guide of a fundraiser Department of the State Pushkin Museum here in Moscow, and I'm going to conduct a brief, about half an hour length, virtual tour on the exhibition Advertising as Art, British posters of the end of 19th and the beginning of 20th century. And first of all, now I'm sharing my screen. And first of all, it is important to mention that for the last 2 decades, Pushkin Museum has been collaborating with different British cultural institutions. And recently we had wonderful exhibition of William Turner, William Blake, last year Thomas Gainsborough and London School of Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud. We also had Pre-Raphaelite art, and all those events were very successful and popular, but they are hard to understand for Russian and, as I believe, non-English museum audience, because the British fine art is unique in a very specific way. And this uniqueness was best formulated by a famous art historian, Nicholas Pevsner, in a series of his BBC radio podcasts and in his best-selling books called Englishness of English Art. He emphasized that approximately since 16th century, the UK is forger of the world. It is a mistress of the seas, the most politically, economically, and socially developed world country. But its art cannot be considered as something avant-gardistic, and it is not cutting edge, and it is not something that the rest of the world tries to imitate. To explain this, Pevsner says that creative impulses of Great Britain are as strong as French and Italian, for instance, but they take a regional shape, something that he calls Englishness. And I'll use his approach on our tour. And this exhibition was a real discovery for me. It's the first English exhibition which is organized without loaning pieces from English museums. It explores on the Pushkin Museum collection. And in my opinion, it is very interesting in artistic, sociological, historical, and even anthropological points of view. It consists of 6 halls. They are dedicated to historical context, advertisements of commodities, underground posters, posters of London public system of transport, shell posters, and Art Deco advertisements. And we will briefly go through them using Pevsner's approach, and this will allow us, as I hope, to show how the best example of artistic commercial was built up in England in previous century, and how that made some specific features of the British culture universally valued and globally appreciated values. And to begin, I'll start with a brief historical context. A daughter of Russian aristocratic house, Yelizaveta Vodovozova, visited London in 1880s. And one day she was walking around the city and she saw how a group of guards accompanied prisoners just through the center of Regent Street. They were wearing terrible uniform, they looked sick and exhausted, they were unchained, and every one of them had a text 12 prisoners on their backs. She was completely astonished, and a few days later she found out that that was a promotion of a theatrical performance called 12 Prisoners. In London, at the dawn of Victorian age, the end of 19th century, was the biggest European city and probably the most industrially developed one. And under these conditions, there was a giant, enormous, tremendous demand for advertisements in the city. And all the city space was full of different kind of posters, as you can see on those pictures. And when the quantity of advertisements is so high, they become faceless and monotypic. And the only way to develop their competitive power is to develop their intrinsic quality. And to solve this task, a group of talented artists turned to posters at the end of 19th century. And so here we are in the first hall of our exhibition. And I would like to briefly describe 3 approaches that were invented by those artists. And the first one was actually made by a group called Beggarstaff Brothers. And they formulated how a good poster should look like. It should be laconic, use minimum of figures and a short motto, and it must be effective and memorable for a person who sees it through a bus window just riding by. And their visual language is quite similar to the language of French avant-garde. For example, affiches of Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec or other French artists of 18th 80s. The next approach was formulated by late pre-Raphaelite artists, and actually they were the founders of modern design. They formulated aristocratic, bohemian, sophisticated elitarian painting art and wanted to expand it to furniture, wallpapers, paper production, and everyday environment. And here we can see a calendar which was presented to subscribers of the Studio magazine, and it is made in pre-Raphaelite style. And lastly, the third approach, and my favorite one, was invented by genius painter Aubrey Vincent Beardsley, and we can see his poster here. Beardsley was one of key figures of the aestheticism movement, a movement of pure art. He was close to Oscar Wilde, and he was famous for his social behavior, image, and subtle style of writings. And Wilde spent his last days in a cheap hotel room in France, and his last words were, one of us must go. It's me, or this ugly yellow polka dot wallpapers. And after that, he passed away. And Beardsley was quite like Oscar Wilde. He put art in the center of his life. He created drawings with almost supernatural dexterity, very effective visual images with minimum artistic sources. He used expensive Japanese paper, rare coloring, and rare pigments, and all his drawings were meant to be reproduced as posters. He was particularly interested in poster making, and he wrote in 1892 an essay about commercial art. And he said that England is besieged by beauty. The achievements of modern avant-gardistic art, they will break through posters to the city streets. Light commercials will shimmer in the sky, and electronic music will play on the street. And it's the most complex approach to developing intrinsic quality of posters. But all those ideas faced resistance from an aspect that Pevsner called one of Englishness features of the United Kingdom. Here we can see beggar stuff poster compared to the famous and expensive affiche of Toulouse-Lautrec of the Aristide Briand show in Cabaret. And here we can see the Studio Almanac calendar compared to famous affiliate of John Everett Millet, which visited Moscow about 6 years ago. And so the resistance was based on the fact that the British culture is a culture of strict social hierarchy. If a man is born in a certain class, especially in the 19th century, he has very little chances of going to another class, and he must follow a special etiquette based on traditional and conservative moral values. And in these conditions, art meant to be something about sublimity or beautiness, and artists cannot work on posters, something momental, pragmatic, and connected with money, of course. And because of that, all those approaches were forgotten in 1880s, but they were picked up in 1920s, as we will see in this exhibition. And moreover, the poster itself as a format faced a serious resistance with this social hierarchy and conservative moral values. As psychological studies of 20th century has shown us, advertisement is as ancient as graffiti, strong language, jokes, and similar phenomena. And it is based on two basic mechanisms always. And the first of them is sexual sublimation. And here we can see a poster promoting a book called Aisha. And then a potential consumer saw a poster like that, and subconscious level, he believed that if he buys the book Aisha, he will gain access to women like this depicted. And it's probably the only naked image, the only image of naked woman in the whole exhibition. And now let's move to the next hall. It is dedicated to advertisement of commodities of the late 19th century. And here we can see example of another advertisement mechanism. It is magical material fetishism, which was highlighted, for example, by Freud. Here we can see a poster which promoting cigarette called Good Lion, and the potential beholder, when he saw this poster on subconscious level, he believed when if he buys the cigarettes or smokes the cigarette, he will gain some features of the person depicted, for example, his bravery, attractiveness, image, and so on. And both those mechanisms did not correlate with conservative British society. And under these conditions, British advertisement and commercials made new mechanisms of poster effectiveness. And here is one of my beloved pieces of our exhibition. It's a poster which promotes dark brown ale. It is called barley wine here because in the 19th century, due to globalization, all types of goods from all over the world were easily accessible in every European country. Something like modern supermarkets appeared, and French wine was gaining more and more popularity among English middle class. And this name, barley wine, must increase competition power of English beer against French drink. And if it was a German poster of beer, we would see a beautifully rendered big glass of beer. If it was French one, we would see a half-naked woman erotically posing near a nice cup of beer. If it was an American, we would see a housewife giving a glass of beer to her husband who has just returned from work. But this is the English poster, and we don't see the beer at all. And in conditions then, two basic advertisement mechanisms were prohibited or not accepted. English advertisements plays with local impressions and emotions. And actually, in the beginning of the 20th century, about 20,000 civil workers lived in the suburbs, and they went to the capital by train. The only thing that could prevent them from going to work was a snowfall. It paralyzed railway system. And here we can see a civil worker. He can't get to his work. He is actually frozen, and the only thing he is dreaming about right now is getting home or to a pub and having a sip of hard warming up beer. And all the advertisement in this whole work the same. And actually in England only three types of products were promoted. It's the foreign ones, new ones, and commodities that are relevant to certain events. And for example, we have here a poster of Dutch gin, analog of Russian vodka, and it depicts a painter like Rembrandt of Golden Age of Holland, and he's having a sip of this drink from its canonic bottle, and we can see the effect on his face. The second type of objects promoted were newly invented ones. And in 1880s, about 10 power plants appeared in London. That invented in some way electric heating. But electric heating was meant to replace fireplace, traditional center of English household. And many people untrusted it. And as Nicholas Persner puts it, one of Englishness features is the love and admiration of the British culture to aristocratic mansions, pictorial parks, and beloved pets, dogs and horses. And here we can see those beloved pets, and they're enjoying the electric heating. That means that electric heating is really good as trustworthy. And actually, here we can compare this poster to a famous piece by Thomas Gainsborough. It was on our exhibition, and those are the dogs which Gainsborough painted to pay for musical lessons for his music teacher. And now let's move to the third group of objects. They are objects that are connected with certain events. And of course, the most important event in the Victorian age English everyday life is Christmas. The most pleasant part of Christmas is gaining presents, and the most hard one is coming up with an idea of a good present for your family. And this poster of Codex is whispering for a potential consumer in December an idea for a good present. And all the advertisements we saw in this hall are very polite. They never promote an object just face to face directly. They are all indirect and implicit. And most of posters in this hall are dedicated to pantomimes, and it's something that completely not understandable by Russian audience because it's a specific local British phenomenon. They appeared mostly in 19th century, and they were theatrical performances presented on Christmas holidays for families. And here we can see, for example, a poster of geisha performance. Here we can see a Cinderella poster. And if we just name all these posters, we will see Puss in Boots, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Mulan, and all the fables that became base of Pixar and Disney that are today an important and fundamental part of modern mass culture. And here we also see giant posters of Robinson Crusoe pantomime, and all those pantomimes were unique, and they used movable stages, lightning, smoke effects, and Robinson Crusoe was played in a special manner by a woman, and in some place Friday was also a woman, and Robinson Crusoe that Friday because she was the princess of an island, and we have different funny and unique variations of classical fables. And so we have described historical context and have analyzed posters of the late 19th century. And now let's move to the next hall. It is dedicated to underground posters. And at the beginning of 20th century, London, like major world cities, Vienna, Berlin, Paris, New York, was radically modernized and became a megapolis in modern sense of the word. And that led to two major consequences. And first was invention of photographic printing and tremendous increase of paper production. Here we can see a poster by Agnes Richardson, and it promotes Sea City, and we would call it today kitsch. It's a mass souvenir postcard production. And the second consequence of this urbanistic modernization is in development of transport system. And in case in London, we should, of course, speak of its famous Metropolitan. But many people did not trust underground, and as they did not trust, for example, electric heating at first. And for that, many artists turned to underground posters. And actually, in the beginning of 20th century, poster production becomes not something antisocial or marginal, but a socially accepted occupation. And many professional artists start producing advertisements. And for instance, here we can see a poster by Mabel Lucy. She was an illustrator of children's book, and she promoted underground in the same indirect manner. It never says that Metropolitan is expensive, cheap, or quiet. It always promotes it indirectly. And for instance, here it promotes this by stressing where you can get by underground. And we can see fairly creatures, fairly characters, and they are going to pantomime. And here Mabel Lucy depicted her 3 children, and in the next decade, a famous baby dolls will be produced after this image. Moreover, we can see Smurfs here, and they also promote underground indirectly. They stress that under earth there is no snow, fog, or rain, and the weather is always good. But the most interesting part of this whole are the 12 posters made by Anthony Sark. They were exhibited in light boxes. We can see them everywhere today, but originally they were invented in London to promote underground. And they face plenty of aspects that Pevsner would call Englishness. And first of all, they are humoristic. And humor in English strict social hierarchy is something that, as Pevsner puts it, unifies the whole nation and provides an opportunity for a man or a woman without aristocratic origins or valuable property be mentioned by ours. And all those posters are made in satiric, humoristic visual language. And also they are connected with another Englishness value that Pevsner called love and admiration for cultural heritage and scientific technological achievements. And here we can see again posters that stress where you can get by underground. And for instance, here in January, we can get to play by the ground. And here we can see a phrase, not a certain razor, but a door opener. And it's humoristic phrase about pewees in London theaters of the beginning of the century. And for instance, I like this poster. It promotes Southend Beach. And here we can see a quotation, the struggle for existence began on the seashore. It's quotation from Charles Darwin. And in this context, it sounds really funny. And moreover, Sark uses quotations from different famous literature pieces. For example, Shakespeare, like here in producing these posters. And his posters are some kind of intellectual quiz. They play with level of education of an average British citizen. And that led to production of another posters. We can see them here. The mechanism is the same, promoting a place where you can get by underground. But the language has changed radically. We can see here some impressionism features. And it's not a coincidence. In 1910, famous Roger Fry exhibited French impressionism in England for the first time. And so, taking into account those unique, subtle, indirect mechanisms of the British advertisements, its play with Englishness features and its intellectual character, the best way to develop British posters further is to involve avant-gardistic achievements of contemporary art. And that's something that really happened next. And now let's move to the next hall. It is dedicated to the posters of London public transport system that appeared in 1910s, 1920s. And here we can see a famous logo of the underground. And all those posters are connected with Sir Arthur Tellens. He was the manager of London public system of transport, and he gained a group of talented professional artists, and he wanted to create new types of posters. Moreover, he changed the image of London radically. In 19th century, London is something that is connected with rain, Jack the Ripper, rain, Sherlock Holmes, coal, smoke, rain, dirty air, dirty water, dark Gothic architecture, and so on. And most people who visit London in the 19th century go on business trips, not tourist ones. And so Arthur Tellens actually provided a design with this famous crimson color. He invented those red telephone booths and double-decker buses. He also influenced change of Royal Guards uniform, and he shaped the modern image of London as friendly city with highly technologically developed and comfortable infrastructure. And all those posters here, again, promote underground by stressing where you can get using underground. But the language is still changing, and we can see here different influences of French modernist painting. For example, here we can see posters of John Frederick Banting, and he depicts Albertopolis, or Victoria and Albert Museum. And for him, this museum is a giant, total surrealistic piece of art, and he admires all the artifacts of natural history and ancient civilizations. And for example, here we can see a poster promoting Chiswick House, a famous neoclassical mansion near London, and it is done in pointillistic neo-impressionist manner. It was made by Vera Ross, and we can see the artist and her son feeding the swans in the right lower corner. And my favorite posters of this hall are the four we can see now. They were made by Clifford Ellis. And according to Pevsner, one of the key features of Englishness is the admiration of the great British culture to its natural heritage. And those posters demonstrate rural areas and countrysides where you can get using metropolitan and railway lines. And actually it has quotations from famous poets like William Wordsworth and members of his Lake School. They traveled in 19th century through nature of England and admired it as something metaphysical and universally valued. And all those posters are very subtle. We can not see the name of Underground. We can see just logo somewhere in the corner. And here the poem says the Buzzy Woodpecker is the only one who destroys quietness in the forest. And it's a subtle promotion that underground is really quiet means of transport. Noise was one of counter arguments against using the underground. So, for example, this poster by Sark emphasizes that underground is ecologically friendly and it does not destroy waters and nature of the UK. And here we may compare posters from this hall with different works from Pushkin museums here. And for example, here we can see a poster by Magnate Koffer, and on the right, a painting by Eugene Carrier. And he promoted a symbolism style, and he was famous for blurry air, blurry colors that translated some transcendental symbolic meaning, and Koffer uses this method to poeticize nature. And for example, on the right side, we can see a painting by Kes van Dongen, who poeticized burlesque, bohemian, cabaret culture of Paris. And Williamson makes a very similar poster promoting London summer festivals. And here we can see a cityscape by Claude Monet and the poster of Pierce. And influence of impressionist vivid cityscapes was especially valued in London. And now, and the last one is the influence of Fauvism movement of Henri Matisse with its therapeutical role of colors and painting, drawing, painting. Albert and Victoria museums has the same graceful and childish, sophisticated view on everyday subjects. And this method, organizing posters with involving avant-gardistic and cutting-edge achievements of art, actually was later picked up not by only governmental structures, but by private companies. And actually it became a universal value. All the best artistic modern advertisements require a good knowledge of visual tradition, art history, and high education. And for example, we can see this in the next hall. It is the one dedicated to shell concern posters. And in my opinion, it's the climax of this exhibition. It's my favorite hall. And it is hard to speak about it, as it's hard to speak about a hall where Picasso, Cézanne, Monet, Malevich and Kandinsky are exhibited in one space at one time, because all those posters were made by the best English and foreign artists of the time. It's the avant-gardistic achievement of contemporary history of art. And all those posters are made in completely different cutting-edge styles. And for example, we can compare them with other works from Pushkin Museum. For instance, we can see a poster by Paul Nash and a painting by André Derain, and the style is really contemporary, similar, and avant-gardistic. We can see a green shop poster and Pablo Picasso's portrait of Ambroise Vollard. And moreover, those posters are close to avant-gardistic achievements of Russian communist design and, for example, Neue Sachlichkeit of Bauhaus. Here we can see Alexander Rodchenko photographic poster promoting book sales, and on the left, shell poster. And on the right, we can see a futuristic suprematistic painting by Kazimir Malevich, and on the left, poster by Green Shot. They're really similar. And the last one is Claude Monet Giverny Garden and Maurice's Gardeners Prefer Shell. And all those posters were placed on Shell petrol trucks, because at the time it was prohibited to put any kind of advertisements on billboards outside the city. They may distract the driver. And it's something revolutionary. And in 1932, there was an exhibition of those posters, and Kenneth Clark, sir, and the director of National Gallery, compared originals with photographic reproductions, and he said that painting is dying because all those reproductions are more effective than their pictorial prototypes, really. And since then, British Museum and National Gallery started collecting posters. And here we can recall words of Beardsley, who said that beauty will break through posters to the city, and that will involve achievements of modern history of art. And that's something that really happened. And this was picked up by the rest of the world in 1930s and 1940s. And they're moving now to the last hall. It is dedicated to posters of Art Deco epoch, or 1930s, 1940s. And here we can see a poster that's promoting Royal Mail line, and we can see an aristocrat of 19th golden Victorian age century. And according to Pevsner, one of the brightest Englishness features of the British culture is a specific sense of session. And he stressed that dandyism, phenomenon of dandyism, is based on wearing expensive, beautiful, fabulous dresses and leaving a consciousness, carelessness element, which actually is the best sign of natural grace and elegancy. And he also emphasized that in conditions of strict social hierarchy, English aristocrats formed a very elegant, relaxed, and charismatic way of body language. And for example, we can see aristocracy on Gainsborough portraits in very luxurious postures. And here we can see such an aristocrat, and on the right side we can see a man of 20th century. And he's wearing completely different dress, but he is one of the bearers of this dandyism tradition. And actually in 1920s, 1930s, mass fashion appeared. All those aristocratic dresses were tailored by order, but in 1920s, a ready-made clothes appeared. And here we can see beautiful posters of certain Purvis. He was royal industrial designer, and he promoted different clothing shops. And actually, Art Deco style is based on avant-gardistic methods, but it returns to figurative realistic image. And the fashion is in the core of Art Deco. And here we can see Austrian race shop poster, or another one. And is, as Yves Saint Laurent said, the best and most fashionable pieces are invented in London, made in Rome, and sold in Paris. And at the time, Marks and Spencer, Benetton, and shops, companies, markets like that appear, and they are the best in the sphere today. And if we look into high fashion, the most important events in this sphere of last decades were Vivienne Westwood and Alexander McQueen. And English fashion became universally valued. And in conclusion, I would like to show the last poster. It's really nice. It was made in 1934 in Art Deco style, because Art Deco is very suitable, quite suitable for poster production, and it is dedicated to 100th anniversary of Melbourne. And we can see here John Batman's and his race. This will be the place for a village. And in the backspace, we can see a beautiful, fabulous city that looks like New York from Roaring '20s, and this is New York of Art Deco, actually. And so this is all the exhibition. And to sum up, we have seen how the best example of highly professional artistic posters and advertisements was built up in England in the beginning of 20th century, and how that phenomenon made certain unique features of the British culture, like humor, politeness, sense of fashion, love for nature, scientific achievements, cultural heritage, universally valued and globally accepted. And that's all that I wanted to say. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope that pandemic will end soon, and we will be able to see posters and French paintings in Pushkin Museum, travel by London Metropolitan, see all those places promoted by Shell posters, and see such a world pearl as Melbourne. Thank you very much, and I will be glad to answer your questions if you have them.
Ilya, many thanks for that absolutely fascinating tour. The passion for the subject, you really brought that out. And as a Londoner, I have to say, I know you stressed it rains a lot, but I've never actually felt that much. But
yes,
I know perception is always important, and you're absolutely right. Most people who haven't been to London always think it rains the whole time. But it was a brilliant tour. I certainly found it absolutely fascinating. And actually, we will be visiting you again on the 22nd of December, although the tour will be in Russian on that day. Details are on the website if anyone's interested, but please join us. And I would love to see it again myself. Absolutely fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's Winter Forum. I hope you've enjoyed the day as much as I have. I'll close by once again thanking the event sponsor, Hudson Sandler, and its managing partner and today's moderator, Andrew Hayes. I'd like to thank all the panelists again, Michael, Rebecca, Irina, Maxim, and David, and Dmitry Aksakov, who was interviewed at the beginning. Of course, a big thank you to the Pushkin Museum, and of course, most of all, to you, the RBCC members and friends, for participating today. I'll sign off by wishing everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And here's to 2021, which I know everyone is looking forward to. Thank you and goodbye.